Alrighty, so we're going to start the 6 o'clock LERTA study session because we like to be respectful of everybody's time, and I appreciate everyone who's been able to make it tonight. So I believe today's study session is just pretty much to go over an update on where we are and what's expected over the next couple of months. If I'm mistaken, please correct me. All right, awesome. Alrighty, I don't know if any other council members had anything to comment before we give the mic to Mr. Groner. No? All right, so we're ready for you, Mr. Groner, when you're ready.
Well, yeah, thank you everyone for taking time to follow up and meet with us again on this. Obviously, we're at a point where we need to decide if we're going to move forward with the program that we have currently. And I've had an opportunity to talk with most of you already about how we feel about it and what we think it's done over the course of the 4.5 years that this version's been on the books. And so we're at that point now. We're at that point to figure out what our next steps are and to gauge your feeling on it, to share some of the numbers that we have. We really do believe it's been an important tool in just incentivizing development and investment in the city. And there's a really strong correlation between the current version that we have and different variations of that in the past. So we just wanted to share some numbers with you tonight, have a conversation about this, see where everybody's at. But we really think it's important that we continue this, continue the momentum, especially coming out of the pandemic, and continue to incentivize that investment and growth in the city. So, Council President, I don't know how you want to do this. If it's just kind of an open
I just
conversation.
know that some people had questions in regards to, how many little people, such as homeowners, did the LERTA actually benefit? And I know that when we had our one-on-one with Renee, and Tyler, you had mentioned that a lot of the little projects helped homeowners be able to update things without them having a tax increase, which encouraged a lot of the development that happened over the last 3 years since the pandemic.
I think that was the biggest takeaway, at least for myself, I think for the team as well, is that we kind of assumed this was a commercial development tool, and it was a surprise to see that just under 2/3 of the permits were actually residential. And so the dollar amount on the commercial side is larger, but the permit number is far larger on the residential side. Yeah, so these are updated. They're actually a little more current than the numbers I have, but we're up to 601 projects that had signed up for LERTA, and you can see that 2/3 are residential. And so I'm kind of coming at this from the perspective of sitting on the city's land bank. I see the other end of the spectrum. Right. And what happens when we don't encourage investment and we have deferred maintenance and we have disinvestment in our city, what happens? Right. The housing stock continues to get older. People forego those investments. And so I really think it's important that we take away probably the biggest hurdle to somebody who's trying to decide if they're going to make an investment. And the biggest hurdle that somebody has, and actually whether it's residential or commercial, is uncertainty. And if everybody just thinks about their own personal situation, when you're going to make an investment in your home, the very first concern you think of is, how is this going to affect my property taxes? Right. And so if you can eliminate that one uncertainty, I think you're seeing that there's a larger bump in the number of folks who are willing to invest in their homes. And we have the numbers that show what happens when you have an abatement like we have now. Yeah, there it is. What happened the last time we rolled off of a 100% LERTA structure. It's as if it fell off a cliff. Mm-hmm. And I don't have any reason to think it would be any different this time. Again, because it's not as if there's an upfront incentive or a grant or some sort of assistance on the front end. You're eliminating a significant uncertainty in their mind. That if I go ahead and do this to my home, that I'm not going to get instantly hit with a higher bill. And the reason I like to look at the history of this is because it's a pretty good indicator, but also because the current version we're in right now is probably the worst time to measure, because half the time has been during a pandemic.
Right.
And so we'll never know what the full effect of this version could have been. Even with a pandemic, though, we saw a significant bump in investment.
Right.
But that was during a time where you can see where it started in '05, and you can see where it ended. And everything's on the margins, and you can see the activity that took place without it, and with the color variation there, you can see what was added to it, primarily because folks knew that that uncertainty was eliminated. And even during that period, that was not a good economic time either. 2008 and 2009 and 10, that was actually a very bad, deep recession, and we still had more investment than we had before that version. So, but I still look to that period because I think it's a more accurate measure than, in COVID times. It's just a horrible measure right now to try to.
But even with the COVID, it still had significant growth, and you could see where our residents benefited immensely from.
I would be if we hadn't had it, I would have really been concerned of what would have happened over the last 4.5 years. It helped to balance out the economic shock of the shutdown. That shows just the visual, how the projects are really evenly distributed across the city, large and small, a wide range of dollar amount in terms of project cost. This really is one of the economic development tools. They're really the only one that is fairly equitable across the spectrum in terms of the size of the project, who gets to apply for it, who qualifies for it. A lot of the economic development tools that are out there they're confusing. It's like alphabet soup. There's all kinds of programs out there, and at the end of the day, a lot of people will call and say, what do I qualify for? And then you drill down in and they find out they don't actually qualify for any of them because they're not a large enough business, a large enough company, they're not creating enough jobs. This is the one program where somebody can walk into City Hall right now and sign up for, and they likely qualify for it. And so just on that measure alone, I think it sends the wrong message that we take away the only tool that the average homeowner is able to come in and sign up for and put a few bucks into their home without worrying about getting hit with a higher tax bill. But I think that's a good illustration of how it's evenly distributed across project costs geographically, and it gives you a sense of the activity that we've seen. And again, this taking effect the second half of 2019, March of 2020, everything shut down. And for about 1.5 to 2 years, it really put a crimp in everything. So we'll never know what we could have had, but even with that, those numbers are really impressive. And then this separates out the commercial, which obviously tends to be concentrated in different areas of the city. This is important too because this shows the hit that we took, just like everybody else for that matter, but in 2020, the hit that we took from the shutdown. The bump in EIT was the adjustment in the rate. So that happened because the rate was adjusted. COVID hit, we took a hit. Coming out of 21, when the projects started happening again, you can see the bounce back. And we're convinced that a significant amount of that bounce back is also a lot of the projects that have been permitted and have taken place in the city. So, it's one piece of the puzzle, but it's definitely an important piece. And so it affects us beyond just the immediate construction and investment. There are those ripple effects that you have, and that's one of them. Same with LST, you can see it was on a slow decline, actually a long-term decline. We hit rock bottom coming out of the pandemic. We've actually seen that turn around. That's impressive that we've been able to right the ship on that number. And of course that goes to fund, that's the tax that, if you work in the city but you don't live in the city, you pay into covering services that you enjoy while you're here. So a lot of the employees and the jobs that have been created coming into the city are paying into that LST. And this is just the jobs, the number of employees in the city. You see again, it bottomed out at the end of the shutdown. We've made a pretty nice comeback over the last couple of years. And number of employers. So first one is employees. This is the number of employers in the city. That's a larger percentage jump. And I would suspect you'd see the number of employees as a trailing, lagging effect to that number. Typically that's a trailing effect, but both are moving in the right direction. This gives you a glimpse of some of the sizable investments that are on the horizon. They're either in the middle of the project now or teeing these projects up. And these are significant investments, investment amounts that we're not used to seeing. And quite frankly, most of these folks I've talked with, they're relying on this upfront assistance. Not as some sort of windfall or huge break to them, but as a way to stabilize these projects in terms of how they cash flow, how they qualify for financing. Just getting them to close is a challenge. And that's one of the things that LERTA serves is a way to make projections work, to make a pro forma work so that you can have certain ratios and debt coverage numbers that you need and things like that for financing to get approved. And it's very important in the early years of a project during stabilization period that you can demonstrate that you can cash flow. And that's one way that LERTA helps, is that you delay that added expense until debt is paid down, until things stabilize, until you have marginal revenue coming in from that investment. And so there's a lot that's on the horizon here. And finally, that shows the current version and what the numbers have done. And you can see 2018 is sort of an outlier because that's when Erie Insurance permitted their project. And so they were going to do the project really regardless. This current version of LERTA started the second half of 19. Of course, 2020 was shut down. Even during the shutdown, though, you can see we still outperformed 14, 15, 16, and 17. We're about even with 17 during a shutdown. 21, 22 is when it really kicked in, when the economy reopened. And then you can see 23. I think this is through May. Is this April or May? May. So it's still trending in the right direction. But really the number to look at is, it's all marginal, right? I mean, the blue is really what probably would have taken place. The red is the marginal benefit of having that incentive on the books. And so you start to trend upward again. And again, 2018 is really an outlier. That's not a number we would normally see in any given year. It just happened to be a good one large project that moved the numbers there. So we're throwing a lot of numbers out here, and I'm sure there's questions, but is that it? Is that the last slide? Okay. Just generally speaking, though, I think we're the position we're in. We need to be doing everything we can to encourage people to reinvest in their properties, to invest in the city, to do what they need to do to turn this old housing stock around, this old commercial space around. We want to be one of those cities that people talk about where look at all their buildings, they're new, look at their investments that are going on. And this isn't going to solve all of that, but this is part of the equation. And whatever we can do to eliminate that uncertainty from folks, it's going to help encourage them to go ahead and open up a little bit and spend a little bit of money on their property.
Now, I know that City Council is only one of the 3 governing bodies that has to agree to this, and from our last meeting, you had said that the conversations were sounding good from the school board and the county as well, so.
Well, I'm cautiously optimistic. I never assume anything until you're there. I think they've been good conversations, and they have questions, and rightfully so they have questions. We need to demonstrate that this works. But I think moving forward, it's sounding positive. We have more work to do, but really it starts at home. It starts here. I mean, we have to believe in this and agree on this, because no one else is going to move on this unless we demonstrate that we believe in it. So it really starts at home.
I have a lot of thoughts, but I don't want to go first if somebody else would like to go. I guess for me, I feel a little like this is I feel like we're rushing a little when we had 4.5 years to kind of prep. So I'm a little like, I think, frustrated with just this process of where we are, because we knew that this was coming, and it's gonna sunset. There's no way that we get this done and passed before it sunsets. So what happens when this sunsets? Like what happens, because we're not going to hit that deadline for all 3 legislating bodies. There's no way we get this done.
I don't know if we're ready to say there's no way, but I mean, even if it
Because
does go
the county
past,
council, like when just with how their meetings fall, and they have to orchestrate with Davis's chief of staff being the person who closed the last one. Like I'm just like, there's a lot of like moving parts here.
There are, and that's why I said that, we're cautiously optimistic. I mean, no one's saying that we're there yet. But what happens? Well, history shows that if you go too long without that, then folks are going to lose faith in taking out that permit, building the garage next to their house, or whatever they had planned.
I guess I
think if it's a short-term
yeah.
situation, I think we can get the word out there that it's maybe something's past a first reading, or waiting on a second reading, and we just let people know that it's on its way. I don't know if that's a very good answer. There might be a way to make it retroactive to permits that are pulled, but I think we can spread the word that it's in the process of being passed. And you might have folks that delay taking permits out for a couple weeks if they have to.
I guess that's one of my big worries, is just what are the legalities around us not having, like the way that the current language reads within the ordinance. I guess is there going to be a punitive thing that happens if we don't, because there will be a gap before we have the next round of ordinances? Is something going to happen where, because there is this lapse, that it defaults to a sunset, that it automatically goes into a space where we can't pick it back up? Does that make sense? Okay.
That's probably a better question for the solicitor. I'm not aware of any, though. I don't think there's any. There's not like an automatic switch that says, okay, now you can't do it because you let it go. I'm not aware of one. Ideally, this will be as close to August 1st as possible, or July 31st, whatever we end up looking at. But it takes time. It's got to go through all 3 of them, and we started the conversation, and I think some important things have come out of this conversation, And if it draws light to that, that's great. I mean, we do need to develop other tools. I absolutely agree with that. This is not meant to be the only method of bringing investment into the city. This is a tool that is very broad. It's not necessarily deep. It's not the type of focused project that's going to make a very large project happen. But marginally speaking and broadly speaking, it helps make the city more competitive. But we need the other tools that are focused on very small areas that have a lot more horsepower behind them that can help bring a large development to the city that LERTA's not going to do that. But you can't replace this with another tool and expect that tool to work either on its own. It's the entire spectrum of development finance, and it goes everything from direct assistance on the front end in terms of grants, debt service coverage, low interest loans, tax exempt bonding, all the way to the other spectrum that helps drive down the cost of that capital and the carrying cost of a property spread out over time. And you got everything in between on that spectrum. We've got the one end of the spectrum, we need to develop that other end. And so I agree that we need to develop more tools. I don't agree with taking a tool away and replacing it with another one.
I guess I know I voted when I was on school board. I voted in one direction, but I agree with what you're saying. I think we'd really harm ourselves, especially with the big projects around the Renaissance and the Avalon, if we don't get this. You know, if we don't renew this, I think it really hurts the city. I don't know that we have the full data picture, and I know that some of the numbers were still coming in, and I had reached out to the superintendent to kind of get a sense of his data numbers. I am curious though, like how many of the ones that were issued permits are tax exempt? Because when I was like kind of going through it, it looked like a lot of them were tax exempt, so LERTA wasn't really going to impact them anyway.
Right. So whether you had a LERTA or not, it wasn't going to, unless they had a pilot.
Yeah.
I think my numbers are somewhat dated from May. We might have some newer ones, but when I went down through the list, at just shy of 40% were still in the pending category, which means they haven't actually analyzed the project, sent an assessor out yet, and assigned a new value yet.
Okay.
So there's a lot of lag time when you do these types of projects. You pull a permit today, especially large commercial projects, the project may take 2 years, right? And even then, by the time that an assessor goes out to assign a new value, then you're into the following tax year after that. So there's always going to be a long pipeline here. So there's not a good answer to that, other than the spreadsheet that I had seen. The number I came up with was 39.6% were still pending. They hadn't been reevaluated yet. So it's hard to get a number when they haven't even sent an assessor out to say, okay, you're going from $1 million to $2 million.
Mm-hmm.
We don't know what that number is going to be yet. But what we do know is over 300 million, and that's probably on the low end, because when you come in and you assign an initial project number to your permit, that's what your initial budget is. And I don't know if I've ever been involved in a project where well, I shouldn't say that. Most of the time, the project, if anything, is going to run over and not under. So if I say my project's going to be $1 million, there's a good chance by the time I get to the end of it, it might be $1.2 million. So in aggregate, you've got 318 million. Could that be higher? Most likely it is, because that's the initial estimate they give when they come in. They have to just put a number out there. I'm doing this to my house. The estimate's 20,000. It might come in at 25,000. So in terms of what it's going to distill down to the assessed value, what you put in the pipeline today could take 2 years to get through that process.
And
So we're not going to know
those
that.
numbers are the new builds, like what we're like. That's how much has been invested. Like, so when we look at that 318 million, that's
Right.
the new. But
Right. So the question is now, that number of 318, how is that going to distill down through the assessment process, and how much of that value is going to actually a value add captured at the end of it?
Mm-hmm.
And that's a function, that's not a city hall function, it's a
It's a
county
county
function.
function.
But, and that's what I don't want to confuse the two. Like, the tool itself, the tool is designed to spur development. These numbers indicate it does that. How much of that flows down to your collection? That's not a function of LERTA. That's not a function of City Hall. That's a function of others. We put this in place to incentivize development, and the numbers show that it works. It's an important question, but at the end of the day, if you're not capturing, so if we all do a project here, the 10 of us or however many sit here do a project, and we all file for LERTA, and they only capture the value of one or two of these projects and the rest of us go unchanged, then LERTA we didn't even get LERTA then. So whether it existed or not makes no difference to the bottom line that you're going to ultimately collect. Because the only time you get it is when they reassess you.
Yeah.
So if 9 out of 10 of us don't get hit with a new value, whether this LERTA was on the books or not wouldn't have mattered. It's a different part of the machine. This tool is meant to incentivize development. What you do with that value you create is another function that needs to be looked at. I don't know if that answered your question, but
No, it does, and I think that that's the part where I get into.
But
This is what I do in my
would,
spare time, is
but
to
I
be
would
learning.
hate to see us discard a tool that's doing its job on the front end,
Right.
okay?
When it's the
That's
back.
my concern. It's doing its job. What you do with what it's creating, our other folks in the chain have to address that. But I would hate to get rid of what this is designed to do because it's doing it. And then you let the other mechanism of the chain work itself through, or you address the people that are in charge of that. But I would hate to see us scrap something that shows it's doing what it was designed to do.
Do we feel confident in our, I guess, just like as an administration, like moving to the next parts of the chain that might be in the backlog? Do we feel like that we can see this playing out in a way that's effective? If LERTA is, I mean, because LERTA is, and again, I think we would be foolish to not, and because of the big projects that are really depending on this, and we need them. I just want to, I guess, think big pictures. Like, how do we then address to make sure that it functions to its full capacity, and that we're able to capture, and that we're able to get this out? Because I know this is something that the average homeowner can use, but I don't think the average homeowner did,
Yeah.
or knows, or understands, or fully gets it. And I guess I use the term average homeowner pretty loosely, because I don't think the average. I know it's equipped that anybody could go in, but when I know that that only 4% of people of color own houses, so I don't think it's the actual average person that's going to be able to benefit from this, or the people, our constituents. It's the only one that I'm aware of, though. There's no income limit or restraint on it.
No.
Right? That anybody can just come in, and if they have the money to up front, because I think that's where it gets confusing, is people think that this is going to be some type of loan or something that they can't, but they have to have the personal money to be
That's
able
true.
to invest, to use it.
That's true.
That
Still by far, though, in terms of the menu of economic development programs that are out there, they all gravitate to the very big projects. Those projects, how do I want to say, those projects are going to get the assistance they need if they draw enough investment in job creation, right? They're going to get it from somewhere. But if you're a small pizza shop, if you're a small hair salon, if you're a small, I don't care what you are, small business, that you're leasing a small storefront, paying rent to a landlord, you can still benefit from this. Most commercial leases are triple net, so in other words, that's a flow down. So and most of these businesses fund the build outs themselves. Okay, it's a turnkey, here's your lease, here's the plain white box space that you get. If you need to adapt it for your business, it's on you. Now that investment that you put into that building triggers a tax increase on the landlord's building. Guess what that flows down to?
You.
They're almost always triple net leases, so it's going to land on you. So you're financing the build out, you're paying the higher taxes. Landlord's just a pass through. Now, a pizza shop calls me and says, do I qualify for a whatever alphabet soup you want to use, the new CRIZ, a RACB, enterprise zone tax credits? The answer is no, 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 because you're not bringing in 30 jobs. You got 2 jobs there. It's not enough. Do I qualify for LERTA? Yes, you do. Why? Well, I'm putting money into my storefront. The landlord's he's making me put it in. Okay, yeah, come in and sign up for it. They may never actually get one because they may not be reassessed at a higher value, but it's taking that uncertainty away from the salon owner, the pizza shop, the whatever. I mean, all the little businesses in all the buildings down here, none of them actually, most of them don't actually own the building they're in. But they're the ones putting the money in it.
Chris, how did we get to the point where it had to be either or? We have to get rid of LERTA so we can bring another tool in? Then why are we here? LERTA's been working for a long time. I used it twice myself, residentially, and several times in the business world. I mean, it does create jobs, it creates economic development. It's a feel-good thing because people are doing things. Right. Bigger garages, things like that. Some guys live for a bigger garage than a bigger house, depending on what part of town
I
you're
think
in.
the silver lining from this is that
if we can find other tools to add on,
right, we need to do that.
I'm with you there all the way, but I don't want us to hurt LERTA.
I mean, I enjoyed how you said it gives the person who's doing the project the certainty that they're not going to get hit with a bigger bill, and we have some of the highest property tax in the area. So if people are concerned with their taxes going up, and that's why they're deferring the maintenance, not doing the stair, not doing the garage, not
Right.
doing anything that makes the outside curb appeal look good, because they say it's not worth the bill later.
Yeah, I don't want to get hit.
Yeah.
So I'm not going to do it.
So I don't think LERTA is necessarily a horrible thing to continue. I think it would benefit the homeowners, but I also think that there might be a language barrier. Also, maybe the knowledge of what's available in your city. I'm a first-generation American. My dad came here from Mexico, and language is a big problem. He's a homeowner. He probably doesn't even know that he could qualify for a LERTA. And that's something that is very apparent in homes. And I agree with Tyler, not everyone knows what's available. Not everyone is knowledgeable in the fact that there might be programs available or that they could get some type of reassurance on projects. And I think that as a city, we need to do better at making sure that the language is not a barrier. Like, we have a multi-language community, we have multi-generational communities. Like, there's a lot of things that could benefit people if they just had the information.
I think if anything, what good things that can come out of this conversation, 2 things. We need to develop the other tools. We can't get complacent. Yeah. And number 2 is to circle back around and make a push on this again, whether it's with the mayor's press conferences or, putting it on prominently on the city's website. I don't know what it is, a combination of things. Dear homeowner, go ahead and put that new driveway in. Go ahead and build that garage, put the new deck on, put the new shed in the backyard, invest in your neighborhoods. Because if we can't get them to invest in their neighborhoods, I'm eventually going to see it at the land bank level. And it's going to cost me a lot more. It's going to cost us a lot more to address that than if we would have incentivized them to address it years earlier. And so, these are good things that every once in a while you shake up the conversation and take a look at what you have again. But the councilman's question, is it either or? It's absolutely not. You can do, other cities do this. We can do that. We can have a very well-designed TIF for the right project. The thing about a TIF, though, is that's not going to benefit the broad majority of citizens unless you're in that small geographical footprint.
Right.
But again, it's important because it's a deeper tool. It's not a broad tool, but it's a deep tool. And it's going to bring more to a project than LERTA ever could. For the right project. But, we're working on what really theoretically is sort of a TIF, and that's a CRIZ. works in somewhat of the same way. You're capturing increment that's going to go elsewhere. And, we're hopeful that that's still going to happen. But that doesn't mean these other tools can't be designed. I think we need to let CRIZ play out before we start trying to design a TIF, because if for whatever reason it doesn't happen, a lot of the properties that are in the current design of a CRIZ, then we could probably put into a TIF. It'd be a different name, different design, but the same outcome. I think we need to let that play out
That's
first.
floating around out there.
Right, Chris is MIA, and we really can't count on that until we know
Right.
what's going on in Harrisburg. So we
Right.
have to make sure that as a city, we're making avenues for our residents to be able to do some of these updates, some of these needed projects, and then them not get a big bill at the end of the year, because their bill is already big.
And the other thing, I'll just throw out one other point. We're surrounded by municipalities that have some form of LERTA or another too. This is not like a special tool anymore. I mean, Harbor Creek has a LERTA, Mill Creek has a LERTA. It's a very focused one. It's not as robust as ours, but Corey has one. Corey has 100% LERTA. I believe even like Albion. I mean, so now what you're doing is we're already at for some reasons, a competitive disadvantage to draw capital back into the city. So now you're creating a vacuum out, and we don't need to do that. We already have enough challenges keeping that money here and keeping the dollars flowing back into the city. So, for that reason too, I mean, we're just not in a position to start taking that away.
I think for me, the bottom take home, the thing that I'm most anxious about is that the data isn't fully capturing, or it's not fully there, and that we need the other two legislating bodies. Like, my biggest worry is where the other two legislative bodies sit, because we could all come to agreement. We could, but but then this is just all us being friends, because we
Right.
need the other two entities really on board.
Right. But the thing you have to keep in mind is it has to start at home, because they're not going to move without us. And I remember the prior versions. The city had to move first, or they won't entertain it, because if
Right.
we're not going to do it, then they're not going to do it. So at the end of the day, we do have to take that first step and demonstrate that, okay, we believe in it.
We're more important than people give
And-
us credit for, Tyler.
I know, but I guess, like, for me, like, time-wise, I'm looking at, so agenda item setting, this could get us on, first reading July, by end of July, second reading, which would then, if that means that they're moving, that wouldn't initiate them until the earliest is August. So I guess that's, what I'm saying, like, so then
Well,
they'll
we're-
have to look at.
I mean, that's the worst case scenario, yes, but we still have to get moving, but we're hopeful that maybe we can bump that timeline up. I mean, we're gonna have those conversations with the other bodies. I think if we can demonstrate that, for example, July 3rd is a first reading, typically they want to see us go through both readings before they move. Maybe they'll be open to that. That, okay, we've passed it on a first reading, then they may go ahead and move on it then. I don't believe it takes two readings from the other entities either, so, it's still possible to do this by the end of July. But it's not possible if we're not starting here at home. I mean, they're not going to move on it until we demonstrate that we've put it on the agenda, we've passed it through a first reading. Maybe that will give them the comfort level to go ahead and start the process on their end. And the worst case scenario is we go past the 31st, and there may be a couple weeks where we're in between. That's not ideal, but especially during building season.
I just wanted to thank you for your expertise and sharing it with us. I always look to my own neighborhood around me. I've been in a decent neighborhood, middle class, since 1987. I was watching the Blighted Property Review Committee and was so pleasantly pleased to see 3 houses were rescinded. And one was in my neighborhood just down the street from me. And it was such an eyesore, that house. And it was taken over by a gentleman, and it looks like a brand-new house now. They had to tear down the garage, which was completely falling apart, and they had a lot of work to do on the inside of the house and that on the outside as well. But it makes a difference. And a lot of my neighbors are middle class, seniors, middle-aged people, and it really is needed for the average person. I think that myself, you know, how I would be able to benefit when it's needed, and it's going to be needed. I need new things. But also, when I was working at the front desk for a year, I got to see our people upstairs sit down, and, you know, LERTA was mentioned, and, you know, I got to witness that, and I passed out permits and things like that, and got to see the growth. And here we are, it's just June, middle of June, so we have July, August, September, October, where, you know, building is still going to be going on. So I am for it just because of the average person that needs the help, and great for the commercial people too. But any incentive for the average business, the average person needs the help as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you,
It's
Kevin.
nice to see homes, it's nice to see blighted homes rescinded off the list. I've seen my second one on the land bank now, where they took it off. And because they decided to go ahead and invest in those, so that was money we didn't have to spend.
Well, we hear of the lack of quality housing and the lack of our current situation where we're at a low housing stock. So it's like, when you think how many houses we've had to knock down because of the deferred maintenance, how we could have saved quality houses, it makes me think like why we hadn't had versions of this in the 80s as well, but you can't speak for the past. All we can do is learn from the past.
Yeah, there's a
And I'm
housing-
hopeful that with us giving the homeowners more of a reason to invest in their property, this could be something to save some houses that might fall into the land bank or
Yeah,
on the blighted
and the
property.
housing shortage, I'm glad you mentioned that. I don't think that's going to improve anytime soon. That's a national problem. And, you know, this tool was vital in expanding affordable housing capacity. I worked with, on the project at Richford Arms and on High Point Towers, and worked with the other creditors on that deal. And we had to get creative with how, even with LERTA, even with the 10-year LERTA, it cash flowed years 1 through 10. Years 11 through 15, we still had to invest some of our home dollars in it to make it cash flow so that we could get the other sources in the capital stack to go along with the project. Stuff that you probably, unless you're underwriting it and you're a numbers geek like me, you don't even know. But those two investments, and those are vital for our community, affordable housing. Without the LERTA, I don't know if we wouldn't have had enough home dollars to put into those two to make them work. And it was one of those things that was below the radar that nobody really looked at. But I had a lot of conversations with the other creditors in that deal, tax credits that were going into that deal, and how do we make this happen? And we had 2/3 of it covered with LERTA, thankfully, and we were able to backfill the other portion to get the ratios to where they needed to be, so that the other creditors would approve the financing. And there's a lot of happy residents in both those buildings right now.
And who knows, hopefully this could entice other buildings to step in line, because I've worked in Tulio Towers delivering Meals on Wheels, and then also in, can't remember, it's right there across from the Dollar General, the building. I can't remember what it's called.
Mid-City?
Mid-City Towers, that one is horrible. They have a broken elevator, and it has been broken for like 4 years. So
least-
hopefully.
At least 4 years.
At least 4
I
years,
delivered
yeah.
2.
Yeah, so I'm hoping that, with other buildings doing some updates, it will encourage some of these other buildings to maybe
Gotta go
apply
down
for
the
some of these
stairway. The
funding
door's locked.
opportunities to, make the quality of life better for our residents.
Right,
Because
because
just
the-
because you're low income doesn't mean that you deserve to live under, subpar
Right,
conditions.
the ones that suffer are the ones that can least afford to.
Yeah.
Is Tulio one on 9th Street?
Yeah.
Just
Right,
that-
right
that-
outside GCAC.
That's the brutal one.
That one's
Really
bad too.
brutal.
Well, I think that
Much
one-
worse than Mid-City.
Well, the Mid-City and the Tullio are managed by the same property people.
Well, they're putting their money into the one closer to the ball field, I'll tell you that. 'Cause I've been in both.
Either way, they're bad.
But there's definitely things that, this has been a good conversation because it's brought things to light. I think there are other parts of this that we need to look at, to your point, that are really not under our dominion, but we need to look at them. And those conversations are starting. We have a meeting, we're going to be meeting with some folks over there. I've talked to the county executive a couple times. And so if that can maybe adjust or tweak something on the other end, that's good for all of us. Because again, if that's not happening the way it should be, capturing value, LERTA had zero to do with that.
Right.
Has nothing to do with capturing the value that's creating. That's a different function. And if it shines a little bit of light on that, we may see a little bit of a bump just from that. But
Because there's such a backlog then with the assessment, do we have a ballpark? This is a question that has been asked of me quite a bit. Is the number that was not collected because of LERTA? So like if LERTA didn't exist, how much would have been paid in taxes? Does that make sense? Like how much, what is that number that was abated?
Well, you can't, what's hard to quantify about that is that you don't know if the project would have happened
Right.
still. There's no way to quantify that. There's no way to say that for sure this project would have still happened.
So, okay, but how about with the projects that did happen though? Like,
What's important to realize is when you improve your house, that's a good thing.
yes.
But to put a roof on it is not going to make your house worth a whole lot more because people expect the house to have a roof on it. If
Maybe
you're
this
gonna do
is-
a kitchen, if you're gonna do a bath, there's money in that and money back. I'm speaking as a real estate broker now. But to do the fundamental things of putting a driveway in that's cracked or non-existent, people expect that. So you're not gonna get dollar for dollar back on that. And I understand what you're trying to say. And in some ways, it's good, and other ways, it's not. We're already taxpaying.
I think I know, it's like, what you're asking is, have we looked at what has been, or what is going to roll on here when this
Yes.
expires, right? So the back of the napkin number is about the same as what I heard a councilman quote was about $1 million. That's probably fairly close. And I look at that and I think first of all, there's no way to know if all of that development would have happened. Assuming 100% of that development would have still happened, then it cost you probably $1 million that you're not collecting. There's no way to assume that because the graphs show you that it wouldn't have happened, most of that. But even if you assume that 100% of that activity would have happened and that you were going to give that up for 10 years, I would give up $1 million for $320 million in development. I would do that every day because eventually that's going to pay you back more than what you're foregoing waiting for that. That to me is a tremendous return on your dollar. But again, you can't assume that number because you don't know how many of those projects would not have happened without LERTA. And history shows a very large, it could have been half, could have been more than half, would not have done the project. So then you were, remember that one graph, it was like blue and red. The blue is sort of what would have probably happened without it. The red was the marginal. That's the number that you have to.
I think it's like an orangey red.
Yeah, the current one. I think it had,
That
yeah,
one.
that one shows, just shows, okay, the run-of-the-mill projects, and then the red captures what qualified under LERTA, what they signed up under LERTA. So that marginal amount gives you an idea of what you might be abating. So, you know, you can look at it and say, okay, maybe half the projects wouldn't have happened, roughly. But it's a tough one you just don't know. Like,
Yeah.
no one's going to say to you for sure, like, there's nothing on the application that says, will you do this if you don't get LERTA?
I think that
Check
unless you
yes or
go
no.
survey every single person who's applied for LERTA and ask them, would you have done your project with or without, and they give you a 100% guaranteed answer, you might be able to have a guess on roughly what would have still happened outside of
All we know,
us.
all we have is history to show us that probably half or less than half the activity without LERTA, you're going to lose over half your activity. That's the only way that I can look back at this, and the prior version prior to this was even more stark. That one. I mean, if you know, I have no reason to think history wouldn't repeat itself again.
So between 2012 and 2016, was there any LERTA at all on our record?
There was a graduated LERTA that had a sliding scale to it.
Okay.
And there was a target zone and a non-target zone. And so each year that went by, it would go from like 80 to 60 to 40 to 20 to 0. And I'm sure it helped, but I just don't think it has the same impact. That's not opinion. I just look at numbers. I just look at what did it do under the prior one, and let the numbers speak for what. That's the only way you can try to project what's going to happen.
I mean, I see it as a success for the simple fact as the homeowners got to use it, and then during the pandemic at that. When the pandemic was happening, there was a lot going on, there was a lot of shutdown, there was a lot of supply shortages, like people were still able to fulfill projects and get things done for their homes. And that made our city look good. And I don't like the idea of us not supporting a tool that benefits the whole city, regardless of your limitations on income. As long as you have the capacity or the capital to do the project, you can get support. And I like that. I mean, granted, not many people have the capital, but if you're a business, hopefully if you want to invest, you are putting money aside for a future update or a remodel of some sort. I've seen many businesses do it in my time here in the city, and it's a great thing to know that we have something that helps them. Encourage that. I'm okay as far as us putting it on our agenda to move it forward. If other council members don't support it, you have your conscience to vote with, and you know, I'm always allowing everyone to do what they want and vote how your conscience sees fit. If you need additional information, Chris Groner is really ready, available, and so is Renee and anybody else on her team. So I just hope that if we have any questions, we are getting those asked and answered in a timely manner.
For me, I guess the clearer picture that I can get around the investment of what were the developments that were under LERTA that were not under another tax abatement that were like either a nonprofit or tax exempt already. I'd like to see just like a little bit more of a clearer picture. Does that make sense? I think it starts to break out in that orange one with the orange and blue, just so I can get the data points a little bit more clear, like how that one's broken down. Like how did you make that
So
graph?
you want all
like
the
what numbers?
you want all the nonprofits pulled out of that, or what?
I'd like, yeah, but it's one that like where it's LERTA actually benefited. Like LERTA is not going to make a difference on a tax exempt property unless they sell it or
unless they're on a pilot and unless they were reassessed. But that
Yeah.
goes back to your other question: how many of these how much of this value are we actually capturing? Because if you're not capturing the value, they didn't get LERTA.
Yeah.
And it didn't cost you anything because they never got one. I mean, it's costing you in a different way, but it didn't cost you because of this tool.
I think it just paints a clearer data picture. That's really, my brain just needs a clear data picture.
So you want a list of who was able to attain LERTA that didn't have any help outside of...
That weren't already tax
Yeah,
exempt.
that weren't tax exempt. Are you able to pull
That were
that?
not tax exempt. Well, yeah, I think we can break, was there a code in animation that,
Because on the website, I mean, there's a lot. There's already, I could break down, but that was an older, the numbers are old. Like, it hasn't been updated for a while. So even if that was just updated, I could pull a lot of that right from those numbers already.
I guess, I mean, we can check with IT. I don't know.
Economic development though, too. You got people working, getting paid for doing those improvements. So it's
Yeah.
not just the LERTA on tax exempt property. It's those people working to build a second story on it or whatever. That's why it's called an economic tool. And your questions are good. It's very interesting to hear them.
We'll have to check with IT, because I mean, the worst case is you just sit down with a spreadsheet and go through the 600 permits, but,
Thank you. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, thank you.
Just so we have an idea, so everyone's, at ease on what we're going to be doing moving forward. But like I said, we can put it on our agenda at the next available one. I know this one's already set. It's going to be posted tomorrow, probably around noon, so everyone on council will be getting it. But we can definitely move forward for the July meeting.
I'll make a note of that, though, to
That way we can move
Just
things.
as a reminder that we will not be here for the next city council meeting.
No, we won't. We will be at Booker T meeting at our 6:30 new council time. We'll be there at 6 because of caucus. But yeah, it was publicized, I want to say in April, that it was posted to the summer tour of us going around to all of the community centers. I just don't know if anybody in the media has given another push. So hopefully, once we check with the clerk's office, we'll know if they did another push to let people know that the 19th is going to be at the Booker T.
Thank you.
Which, shame on me, I should have caught that it was Juneteenth and we shouldn't be having any type of a meeting there. But I did check the calendar, and this was the only meeting that we're having on a holiday outside of the 3rd, which is the day before the 4th. So,
Big celebration on Saturday.
yes, Juneteenth celebration on Saturday. So I feel not as guilty that I'm taking people away on that Wednesday, but because the celebration's happening Saturday. But for the good of the order and to respect everybody's time, we are done. Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you.
Thank you, all of council.
Thank you.
And thank you, Renee.